Welcome to our weekly 3-minute therapy podcast. I'm Dr. Michael Edelstein, clinical psychologist, and my co-host, as always, is Mick Berry, and we both specialize in REBT, Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy. And REBT was devised by Albert Ellis around 1955, 1956, which caused a sea change in the psychotherapy movement from the old psychoanalytic approach, where the idea was your emotional problems start in your childhood, so the therapist would talk to you about your childhood, whereas Albert Ellis demonstrated that our emotional problems don't come from our childhood, rather it comes from our thinking, particularly irrational thinking in the moment when we have emotional or behavioral problems. And the main kinds of irrational thinking are in terms of demands: musts, shoulds, supposed tos, have tos. And there are three types of demands. A demand on oneself, which takes the form of, because I prefer to, I absolutely must do well and get approval. And if you disapprove of me, that proves I'm no good. And that leads to anxiety, guilt, and depression. The second type of, the second type of must is a demand on others. You must treat me well and do my bidding. And if you don't, you're no good. You're a rotten person. That leads to anger, resentment, and hostility. And the third must is a demand on the conditions of one's life, not on oneself or others, but on conditions and situations. And that takes the form of, my life must be fair, easy, and hassle-free. And if it's not, then my life is horrible, and I might as well escape with drugs, alcohol, or procrastination to avoid the hassles in my life, or even worse, suicide. So what we do as REBT therapists is we help clients identify their demands, their musts and shoulds, and show them how they can uproot their demands, because demands are never realistic. They go against reality, whereas preferences that underlie demands do make sense. Mick, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that about covers it.
Okay, good. And we are honored today to have a special guest on the phone, and that's Dr. Leora Manischewitz. And Dr. Manischewitz has been practicing for over 30 years. And Dr. Manischewitz, you specialize in marital and sex therapy. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And do you have a particular approach that you use, sort of an orientation to that therapy?
Yeah, so you know what I'll do first? Let me relate it to what you just talked about in terms of the three types of demands that people put on themselves or their lives that REBT therapists try to dispel. So when somebody comes to sex therapy, usually they are extremely anxious, and they're extremely anxious about either something that's, quote, not working right, or they're very anxious about a partner's reaction to something that's not working right. So, you know, if we took the demand made on self, it would be, I should be able to be a good lover. I should be able to sustain an erection. I should be able to have an orgasm. And once they place these demands on themselves, then they try to, quote, fix the problem if any of those are not working. And so they just apply a lot of pressure on themselves. And by the time they come to a sex therapist like myself, usually this has been going on for a very, very, very long time. Nobody wants to go talk to a stranger about their sex lives. So they try to fix it and fix it and fix it. And then the second piece is the demand of the partner. You should be understanding is on one end, And on the other hand, you should get the hell away from me because I can't give you what you need. I'm failing, and thus we're failing, and thus you should get away. And so there's all these demands that immediately also get put on the partner. And then as far as conditions of life, with sex, I find more people tend to focus more on the first and the second. It's my fault, especially in the age of the internet, which dictates how everyone is supposed to perform sexually. It's my fault. I'm not living up to the standard. You should run. So sex therapy started from a physiological basis. The first major thinker was Alfred Kinsey. He was a biologist and a zoologist. And after him came Masters and Johnson, who started doing actually observation of subjects having sex. And they started looking at the kinds of pressure that people were putting on themselves more. And they took it more into the behavioral aspects. And then after them came Helen Singer Kaplan, who tried to incorporate some more feelings and psychoanalytic theories into the practice of sex therapy, which is all my very long-winded way of saying that usually I come at it from whatever approach and combination of approaches that will be tailored best to the particular patient who walks in the room.
Okay, very good. And do you see clients in person only, remotely only, or both?
So I do both. Since COVID, obviously everyone was doing remotely. I came back to the office about a year and a half ago, and I 2 days a week see people in person and 3 days over Zoom.
I see. And where are you located?
I'm in New York City, in Midtown New York City. You're in California, right?
Yeah, Mick and
Yeah.
I are in California.
Yeah.
Mick, did you have a question?
Yeah. So everything sounds terrific. One of the people that I found out about for advice on sexuality, there's a guy named Bernie Ziebergeld. Are you familiar with him?
Yeah.
Yeah, he wrote a book called Male Sexuality. And
Right.
what's that?
I said, that's right.
Yeah, and quite an extensive book. It's very thorough. But one of the exercises or one of the prescriptions he has in there for a couple that is having trouble in bed is for to if well, I'm trying not to be vulgar here, but if the man is having a problem with an erection, then the rule is that once to play with each other. I'm trying not to be vulgar, but play with each other. But if you start to have an erection, you have to get out of bed and you have to stop doing it and discontinue it. And this completely removes any demand there to where your goal, I think he even says your goal is to not have an erection. That's your goal. And if you start to have an erection, you have to stop the exercise. And he said that invariably what happens is people disobey him because they start to get excited and they then in the heat of the moment get carried away and they come back and they say, well, we didn't follow your advice. I say, great, I didn't want you to. Or at least, the advice, it takes away the pressure. So I just wanted to mention that as something I found helpful.
Yeah, instead of telling the male telling himself, I must have an erection, he starts telling himself, I don't have to have an erection because the doctor told me not to. And so he takes off the must, and then he's more likely not to pressure himself like that.
Well, even more than that, Michael, I think he might even start telling himself, I must not have an erection because he's quite skilled at creating musts.
Yeah.
Because he then can easily slip into that. It's very easy to take all the pressure off on having an erection.
Yeah, Dr. Manischewitz, did you want to say something about that?
Yeah, no, that's great. His book, when people come to see me, I usually recommend his book for men first. There's a book I recommend for women. called What Your Mother Never Told You About Sex. And that's a nice way to just get people going a little bit. Let's do some reading. This is not homework, but just rifle through it and see what catches you. Because they're both very, 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 Zilbergeld's book is really readable and geared toward the lay person. That kind of advice reminds me of when a man has premature ejaculation. What we try to teach him is, how are you going to delay ejaculating? So we give him an exercise in which we ask him to stimulate himself and then let the erection subside. Stimulate himself, let the erection subside. Stimulate himself, and then reach orgasm. And the philosophy there, psychology philosophy there, is you take charge of your own ejaculation. And so you decide when you're going to be hard and when it's going to subside. You decide when you're going to stimulate yourself and when you're going to let it go, rather than your penis controlling you. You take back charge. And this is a similar kind of thing. It sounds like that. So I haven't looked at that in a while, in which he's saying you take charge of when you have an erection, rather than you getting in the bed, getting stimulated, and then losing your erection and feeling terrible. So you take charge. If you get an erection, get up and get out of bed, because you've decided not to have one at that moment. That helps a lot of guys calm down.
Yeah, and you're reminding me of another instance in the book where he talks about these myths about men and sexuality, that men want to have sex any time of the day, any moment, always ready to go. Well, I don't, and most men I know don't, but there's this myth, and it's a complete myth. And sometimes you just don't feel like having sex, and there's no particular reason. You just don't feel like having sex. And that's absolutely okay. And it's fine for you to express that to your partner. And I think that I've been with a few women that took it personally if I didn't want to have sex. They thought it was something about them, because they believed that this myth that men must always want to have sex. And if he doesn't want to have sex with me, there's something that's wrong with me. And I had to work through that and assure these women that it didn't have anything to do with them. I just didn't feel like having sex at that time.
Yeah.
Right.
Another myth that I've seen with clients, and I wonder what you think, Dr. Manischewitz, is we must have sexual intercourse in order to have sex. Well, there are other ways of having sex without having sexual intercourse: oral sex, hugging and kissing to orgasm, things like that.
Yeah. So it's so interesting you say that, because everyone who comes to the office, when they talk, when they talk about sex, it's different than the way I use the word sex. So to them, it's intercourse. That's the deal. That's the word sex means intercourse. So then I start talking about, what now? Can we expand that a little bit, maybe? What about oral sex? What about manual stimulation?
Yeah.
Oh no, those two. At the beginning, kind of doing me a favor. But then over time, as we start to work, and we use a number of different ways of taking the pressure off of intercourse. Once there's pressure on intercourse, forget it. Nobody's going to have a good time. And like I said at the beginning, the couples keep trying to figure out a way to make it work, whether he's not sustaining an erection, or she's not having an orgasm, whatever it is. It becomes, especially for men, it becomes somewhat more catastrophic. And the reason for that is because men's performance, there's nothing about it that you guys can hide. You're either getting excited or you're not. Women, and I hate to say this, but women, we can fake what we need to fake. So women can fake an orgasm, for example, right? With men, there's so much pressure on just the erection itself. And so what we do is we take the pressure off and actually ask the couples to stop having intercourse. And depending on the couple, I'll even use the word prohibit, you know. For couples who sometimes people feel a little too, I'm bossing them around too much, or it reminds them of their mother, whatever it is, then I won't use that word. But we take the pressure off by saying, do you really need to have orgasm at intercourse at this very moment? You're coming here, you're spending time and money talking to me. Let's relax it just a little bit to start. Oh, okay. When they finally allow themselves to kind of relax, even on the couch in my office, then we can get to work.
Yeah. And Mick, I was going to say something, but I think you're going to say the same thing. So, Mick, what did you want to say?
No, I don't think I'm going to say the same thing. Go ahead.
Yeah. So one of the ways as REBT therapists we help people take the pressure off is by showing them that they cause the pressure with their musts. I absolutely must perform well sexually, and we help them see there are no musts. There's no law of the universe saying they have to perform well sexually. And once they give up the must, that's another way they can stop putting pressure on themselves. Mick?
Dr. Manasevich, do you want to say something about that?
I wanted to say that there's such a strong emphasis on sex per se, sexuality per se, that many couples forget about or almost never focus on sensuality. And I think if they can change, going along with what you were saying, Dr. Edelstein, if they can start changing some of these punishing thoughts, or let them drift out the window, practice however they're going to do it, or you're going to teach them, they can then begin to focus on a much broader picture of sex. Expand. I always talk about, you want to expand your repertoire. Sex is not just about the art of sex, the act of penetration. What about sensuality? What about eroticism? Right? Sensuality is about the five senses. Are you using your five senses at all? Do you, if you're parading around the house, for example, if you live with someone and you're walking around the house in underwear, are you wearing nice underwear? Because that person's going to be looking at you and taking you in. And you're not their roommate. And so anything that involves the five senses for lovers, on a day-to-day basis is very important. A lot of couples don't even begin to focus on stuff like this because they're too worried about, quote, the act.
Yeah. Yeah, Mick?
Oh, well, Dr. Manasevich, thanks a lot for that. I never thought about the word sensuality in relation to sexuality, but I think, of course, the two can go hand in hand. And when I think about sexuality, I really like to think about sensuality. But what I was going to say before, I once heard Albert Ellis say this: a lot of people think that because two people care about each other a great deal, because they're deeply in love with each other, that the sex will just be great just because of that. And that is not necessarily true. I have seen people say that on national television. Oh, well, if you care about each other, then the sex will work out. And that's just not necessarily true. So I wanted to get your take on that.
Yeah, 100% not necessarily true, right? And it gets very confusing. And that's another kind of calling card for people who come to see somebody like me. We love each other so much, but sexually, it's just not happening. And that could be a function of the stress of their lives. I work in New York City, so I end up working with a lot of people who, people come to New York to live out a dream very often, right? And they want to succeed in New York City. But I work with people who either put a lot of pressure on themselves, or their workplace puts a lot of pressure, or a couple who finally have one or two kids. And so time gets away from them and they're not having sex. And when they do, it's just very perfunctory. That's easier than a couple where one, one likes to try different kinds of adventures or positions or experiences, and the other tends to be more kind of what we might call a bit more vanilla, right? And so there's some incompatibility there, and then the tension ends up rising. And then you have that couple, kind of like what you were talking about, Chris, where they come in and they're just different. They're just not meshing. One feels the other one's awkward. One feels the other one is not present. And all of these are the more difficult kinds of things to treat than if someone comes in and says, I'm having trouble sustaining an erection or having an orgasm. If it's a functional problem, we can usually treat it more easily than if it's a more kind of multi-determined emotional disconnect.
Or physiological problem.
Yes, or definitely a physiological problem. The beauty of sex therapy is that it's proactive, and it's very positive, and it's very, look, you can find a way. What you need to be able to tolerate is some disappointment. Right? Nobody wants to tolerate disappointment. The fantasy is, I'm going to meet this partner, we're going to fall in love, we're going to have great sex. And sometimes that's true. But even for partners who had that, over time, the novelty wears off, life takes over, and it takes work and effort to keep it spiced up. So when they come in and they tell me about the tremendous discrepancy, and they're so disappointed, and they thought it would be so great, and for a while I have them vent their disappointment, because it's got to be said. And then we go to, all right, what are you going to find? What are you going to compromise with? Now that you're going to tolerate some disappointment, you're not going to get everything you want. What can you find and get from each other? Yeah. And usually they can figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah, very good. Mick and I have a lot more to say, and I'm sure you do also, Dr. Manischewitz. Unfortunately, we're just about out of time, so let's have you back if you would like to talk some more. This is a big topic. So we were speaking with Dr. Leora Manischewitz, marital and sex therapist. Do you have a website, Dr. Manischewitz?
I do. It's Dr. Leora Manischewitz. Do you want me to spell it out? .com.
Yeah, Manischewitz as in the wine. Is that right?
Yeah, could you spell Leora? Could you spell it out?
Yes, Leora. So it's Drleora. And do you want me to spell Manischewitz?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, nobody can spell it. Mani, S like Sam, Chewitz.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Think about growing up with a name like Leora Manischewitz.
Right. Yeah. We could have a whole podcast on what it's like. Well, I'd like to thank you, Dr. Manischewitz, for a very interesting and unique for us subject. We've rarely discussed this before. And thank Mick Berry, my co-host. I'm Dr. Michael Edelstein, clinical psychologist and author. And thank you very much, Chris Rossini, our tech engineer, for holding it all together. And comment below if you have thoughts. Give us a thumbs up if you like this. Suggest subjects for future podcasts. Volunteer. Dr. Manischewitz survived, so if you volunteer, you'll probably survive. And subscribe to the 3-Minute Therapy podcast to do what, Mick?
To stay on the rational side of life, sexuality, and sensuality.